This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm Mac Pritchard, your host and publisher of Mac's List. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Ben Forstang, Becky Thomas, and Jessica Black from the Mac's List team. This week, we're talking about what you must say in a job interview to earn the offer. Most candidates in a job interview make a fundamental error, says this week's guest expert, Mark Babbitt. They focus only on answering an employer's questions. Mark says successful applicants take a different approach. He and I talk about that and other interview strategies that lead to job offers later in the show. Too many people say yes to the first salary figure that comes with a job offer. And that's a problem. When we don't make a counterproposal, we risk losing tens of thousands of dollars in salary over a career. To help you avoid that error, Ben has found a list of common myths about salary negotiation. He tells us more later in the show. You left your home state for an exciting opportunity in another city hundreds of miles away. Now you're ready to go home again. What are the best ways to look for a new job from a long distance? That's our question of the week. It comes from listener Kate Hendricks in Alexandria, Virginia. Becky shares her advice later in the show. As always, let's check in with the Mac's List team. And our topic this week is what you must say in a job interview to get a job offer, to earn it. I'd love to hear from you all what strategies you've either used yourself or seen others use when you've been part of hiring processes to get an offer after a job interview. Anybody want to leap forward? Becky, you're leaning into the mic.
Hey, I guess I have a more general sort of strategy, and that is be prepared to do the job in the interview. I think that if you can get a two-way conversation going in the interview where you are offering solutions to some of the problems that they've got going on, and you can sort of tie your skills and experience to the needs that they have in that interview, that's going to really lead you to a place where the hiring manager is thinking, oh my gosh, this person is ready to make an impact on day one. And in my experience, that's always been a good way to go. That said, that takes a lot of preparation before the interview. So you have to come prepared with some ideas. And, you have to have done your research to figure out what the employer needs. And also, you've got to know sort of where your interviewer's at, what job they have, and what needs they might have so that you can sort of be prepared for that to make an impact in the interview and really, start to do that job, get a two-way conversation going. So that's my advice.
I like that strategy a lot. And because you've got a goal and a plan, a way to prepare, but also you're not using the interview as part of the discovery process. I think it's hard to take a candidate seriously when you're in a hiring process when they ask you very basic questions about the job or the company that they could have learned just by looking at the website.
Yeah, that's the key. Like if your interviewee is asking questions about the company rather than as the interviewee, you are prepared to ask a specific question about their needs and start to find a solution in that conversation. That's going to put you so far above the competition.
Yeah, I agree. Everything that you said was exactly what I was going to say in probably different phrasing, I guess. But going in, demonstrating that you understand the job, you know the employer's needs, and that you're the best candidate for the job is huge. I would say if we're talking about after the interview, thank you notes go a long way. It's really huge. But again, you have to nail it in the actual interview and show that you know. Again, I'm going to reiterate it. You know the job, you know the employer's needs, and you know why you're the best candidate, and you can demonstrate that. That's what I would say.
I would just add a very high risk, high reward strategy here. I think this does work a lot of the times, but it could also backfire, which is as you're talking about the job, talk about it as if you already have it, or that as if you're going to get the offer. So when I start working for you, blah, 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 blah. And I think in some cases it might rub the interviewer the wrong way, that you're being a little bit
Arrogant.
arrogant,
Presumptive.
yeah. But I think it also it plants like an interesting psychological seed out there that like, I'm already working for you. I've already got the job. All you have to do is say yes.
Yeah, and then more approachable if that feels too aggressive for some people, because that wouldn't be my style. But I would do more of a hypothetically, if I was in this role, I would, or things like that, which does the same sort of psychological trick, but is a little bit more approachable, where it's like, no, I'm not just presuming that I already have the job, but I want to demonstrate that I understand this role, and I want to jump in, and I'm excited about this, and I've thought about it a lot.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jessica. I think there's a professional way to be humble, but also to show that you're interested in the job. And like you, I use a phrase like, if I were fortunate enough to get this position,
Right.
And that demonstrates both humility, and you do have to be, to your point, be careful that you don't come across as arrogant.
And again, I mean, it goes back to reading the interviewer. So if you're having a great conversation and you feel that that's appropriate for that conversation, go for it. But if it's someone who maybe is not going to, that's not going to rub the right way for that person, then definitely read the person.
I'd echo that point, because I mean, everyone's been in interviews where like you feel like this is a done deal, right? And maybe like that's when you try to like really finalize the deal by putting yourself in the position, literally. Whereas we've also been in interviews where like, I don't know how this is going, so like you don't want to push your luck with those kind of interviews.
Yeah, I would also say kind of at the end of the interview, reiterating your excitement about the job and your enthusiasm of, saying, I really look forward to hearing from you. I am still very interested, and I'd love to talk to you further, or I'm looking forward to having a further conversation about next steps and that sort of thing. However you would phrase that, but kind of leaving the interview, letting them know, I really want this job and I'm excited about this.
Good. Well, thank you all. I know that we're going to hear some great tips from our guest this week too about how to conduct ourselves in an interview. And to his point, you really do have to work to get that offer. It goes back to Becky's point about preparation. So I'm excited about that conversation. But first, let's turn to you, Ben, because you're out there every week exploring the internet, looking for tools and resources our listeners can use. And what have you uncovered for us this week?
So this week I want to talk about an article I found on one of my favorite sites, which is hbr.org, the Harvard Business Review.
You've cited them a number of times.
I have. It's one of my go-to resources that I just like reading through each week.
I do too. They have great resources.
Yeah, they do. It's like a good mix of news and research. And I don't consider myself like someone who like dives too deeply into business research, but it's good stuff. So this article is called 10 Myths About Negotiating Your First Salary, and it's by Linda Babcock and Julia Baer, who are researchers at Carnegie Mellon and SUNY Stony Brook, respectively. And these two women have spent decades researching and teaching all about business negotiation. And from that research and teaching, they've come up with these 10 myths about salary negotiation. Now, this article should probably be titled, "You Have Absolutely No Excuse for Not Negotiating," because many of the myths that they bust all have to do with common reasons people choose not to negotiate their salary. So things like, I can't negotiate because this is my first job, or the economy is really bad, or I don't have another offer on the table. All these things that people say, oh, that's why I'm not going to ask for more money. But Babcock and Baer are pretty clear on this point, which is that everyone can and should negotiate in just about every situation. Their research is consistent that negotiating is an expected part of the hiring process, that it doesn't reflect badly on you as a job seeker, and most importantly for everyone listening to this show, it actually works.
It does, and there's research out there, Ben, and I think we've talked about this on previous episodes, that the salary you get in a position, particularly early in your career, has this cascading effect throughout the rest of your professional life. It sets a base by which future raises come. So it's in your interest financially to make sure you get that number up as high as you can whether it's your first job or you're switching jobs or you're up for a promotion?
Yeah, it's not just about what that first salary looks like, because when we get salaries, often it's, you're getting a 5% raise or a 10% raise, and 10% on a larger base means you're actually getting more of a raise, when that time comes. So, and over the course of your career, even if you're only spending a couple years at an organization, you can see a big difference, whether you negotiate your starting salary at $60,000 or $65,000 over the course of 3 years. That's a big difference that you might find. So, I know we've talked a lot about negotiation in the show, and we've had several guests come in, including Jeff Weiss from Harvard Business Review, talking about negotiation. And if you've listened to all 120 episodes of our show, this article might be a little bit basic for you. But if you're just getting your feet wet on the topic of negotiation, then I think this is a pretty good primer. So more so than a lot of the folks who have been on our show, however, Babcock and Baird dive into some of the strategic psychology of salary negotiation. We're getting back to that idea of getting inside the mind of the interviewer. And they have some good insights on how much you can push the envelope in your ask, as well as how to evaluate the speed with which an employer accepts or rejects your ask, and figuring out what that actually means. Because the job seeker doesn't have a whole lot of information from the outside. And so you just have to always are interpreting what the hiring manager is based on limited information. They've got some really interesting data about what that actually means, these time differences and the speed upon which people respond. So again, great primer for negotiation. If you are nearing the end of an interview process and you think an offer is on the table, I suggest you check it out. Again, it's on hbr.org. That's the Harvard Business Review's website, and we'll have the full URL in the show notes.
Well, thank you, Ben. And if you have a suggestion for Ben, he would love to hear from you. You can write him. His address is ben@maxlist.org, and we'd love to use your idea on the show. Now let's turn to you, our listeners, and Becky is here to answer one of your questions. So, Becky, what's in the Max List mailbag this week?
Well, this question came to us from Kate Hendricks, and she's from Alexandria, Virginia. So Kate says, I'm from Eugene and consider Portland to be home, as that is where I spent most of my adult years and most of my family lives there. I moved to D.C. after about 4 years ago to take a job at the Department of Energy and jump-started my career. Now that I have a few years of experience under my belt, I want to head home. I've been trying to search for a job from here, but it's proven challenging. I've gotten plenty of interviews, but no job offers. When I ask for feedback, I'm usually told I came in second or there wasn't anything that I did wrong. They just found someone who had more experience or was a better fit. Anyway, my lease is coming to an end very shortly, and I am considering moving back to Oregon without a job and searching from there. This is, of course, terrifying, as I don't want to be unemployed at all. On the flip side, I think it will help me with my chances of getting a job once I'm actually physically in Portland. So if you're able to give any advice on searching for a job from afar versus moving back unemployed, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you, Kate. It's clear from your email that you've done a lot of work on this already, and it's great that you've been getting interviews, and it sounds like those are going well. So I think from a lot of people that I hear from who are doing this sort of long-distance job search, some of those folks aren't even getting interviews or getting any sort of traction at all. So I think that you're doing a lot of the right things here, because the bottom line is that it can be really hard to land an offer when you're not physically present in the city that you're applying in. It is not impossible, however. So I think there's a few tips that I could give that you may be able to use. So one thing is to really over-communicate with the people that you're talking to, whether you're interviewing or networking. Talk about your plans to relocate. So it sounds like you're thinking about moving pretty shortly. So when you're interviewing, go ahead and talk to those folks about your moving dates. Your clear plans to travel and move will sort of alleviate some of the stress for employers who are like, is this person really going to move here? Or are they just sort of like putting feelers out? So that'll sort of help position you. And also maybe think about how you want to address relocation expenses. I think a lot of employers are prone to hire local folks because they don't want to get into that like thousands of dollars of relocation expenses with someone who's moving from a long distance away. So, consider whether you can just say, I'm going to move and relocation is, not necessary, or I'm willing to negotiate around that or something like that, just so that you can sort of alleviate their fears that way. And then I hear your question about what am I going to do with my lease ending? Should I just move? And I've been in that exact situation moving to Portland, and so I totally feel you. And I think it's really up to you and up to the situation that you're in. So you have a lot of local connections, it sounds like already. So if you can feasibly afford a few months of unemployment and you've got that sort of safety net, I would probably recommend to move and just, jump right away into networking, into informational interviews and that professional development to build a local network. In my experience, it's a lot easier to land a job once you're here, especially with Portland's culture of sort of who is really important. So that's where I would land on it. And I know it's different for everybody, so you really need to do that thinking on your own and figure out where you're at financially and professionally. But, if you know you want to be here, make the jump and do your best due diligence once you're here to really build that network right away. And I think you'll be fine. We also have a blog up on MaxList that I'm going to link in the show notes that gives you some of these tactics written out. So hopefully that will help as well. Any other thoughts from you guys?
I have a couple extras.
Yeah.
I was also going to reiterate your last point about it is easier to job hunt in the city that you're wanting to be in.
Yeah.
And so I would also second that, especially if your lease is up. And again, do what you need to do. But I think that it sounds like you already sort of want to do that and you're just not really sure if it's the right decision or if it's a safe decision.
Mm-hmm.
But again, with your connections and your family here, it might be a perfect scenario rather than moving to a city that you don't know anyone and you don't have a place to crash or a support system.
Yeah.
But all that said, I also wanted to mention that you can, I have a couple of pieces of advice. Number one, know why you're moving and be able to articulate that so that when, because again, I think that, there's a connotation of moving from a large city with a lot of the idea being there's a lot of jobs and opportunities and you're moving back to a city, especially if you're working for the government, and if there's a smaller organization or a smaller pool for that, there may be some questions that are raised that if you don't address them and you're not transparent about that could be where the employer's mind is just going to run with whatever they believe, even if it's not true. So, for example, talk about what you learned from the Department of, was it Energy?
Mm-hmm.
Department of Energy, and what kind of skills you can translate to your next job and why you're looking to do that and why you're looking to come back to sort of a smaller pool or whatever it is that's giving you that push. And I would encourage you, family is a legitimate reason, but I would also encourage you to steer it towards what the job offers as well. So I think family as a bonus, but what the job is offering you or, what you're offering to the job.
Like your professional goal.
Absolutely.
For moving. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then I would also say that absolutely start making connections and for informational interviews and seeing what kinds of networking you're going to do when you get here. But I think that you can start doing that from afar by LinkedIn connections and all of that stuff. So I would just encourage you to do those few things and good luck.
Thanks.
Just echoing Becky's point about it sounds like you're in a better situation, Kate, than other folks because you've got a family and friend network here in the Oregon area. So I would leverage that for as much as it's worth. Let those people know. Let your parents' friends, their friends know that you're looking for work in the area and specifically what you're looking for because that's going to help a lot. And with employers, I would not just focus on, when you're going to move, but be very clear, I'm moving because I've got family here. Again, if that's family is a strong, legitimate draw, and employers will feel much more secure knowing like you're moving to a place where you've got a support network, you've got people that you know. You're not going to arrive here and then realize you hate it and move away in 2 months. Play up those assets.
The only thing I would add to all the excellent advice is you're employed by a national organization, the federal government, and whether you're employed by the federal government or a national or regional corporation, sometimes you have the opportunity to take the job with you and work remotely. In the federal government, it's called being detailed. Maybe she could get detailed to Portland. I have to imagine she's thought about that. But if that's not a possibility, maybe there are contracts or short-term projects she can bring with her, whether she's coming to, in this case, it's Oregon she's interested in, but any state.
Yeah, that's good. Good point.
That's a great idea.
Okay.
Cool.
Well,
Thanks, guys.
you're welcome. Well, thank you, Becky, and thanks for the question. If you've got a question for Becky, please email her. Her address is becky@maxlist.org. You can also call our listener line, and that number is area code 716-JOB-TALK, or send us a message on the Max List Facebook page. If we use your question on the show, we'll send you a copy of Land Your Dream Job Anywhere. And we'll be back in just a moment. When we return, I'll talk with this week's guest expert, Mark Babbitt, about what you must say in a job interview to earn the offer. Now let's turn to this week's guest expert, Mark Babbitt. Mark Babbitt is the founder of U-Turn, a social resource for young professionals that Mashable calls a top 5 online community for starting your career. Mark is also the president of Work IQ, a community that looks at the key factors that contribute to our collective workplace intelligence. And he's the co-author of the bestseller, A World Gone Social, How Companies Must Adapt to Survive. Mark joins us today from Colorado Springs in Colorado. Mark, thanks for being on the show.
Of course. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, Mark, it's a pleasure to have you. And our topic this week, as you know, is what people must say in a job interview to earn the offer. And let's talk about that, Mark. I know this is something you feel passionate about. Why do job seekers have to work hard to get that offer in the interview?
Well, I think the main point is that we don't have to treat the interview as an interrogation. I know that's cliche advice right now, but especially young people and those that might lack a little confidence, those maybe re-entering the workforce after a while, they just sit back and let the interview come at them. And there's so many points that you have to get across to earn the job offer. And it starts with, how specifically are you going to solve the problem the employer is trying to handle with this hire? And so you have to talk about your value. And trust me, it has nothing to do with being a detail-oriented, hard worker, people person like everybody has on their resumes. It really does get to your specific value and how you're going to solve problems in that role.
So many people, as you know, Mark, walk into the interview and they wait to answer questions. You talked about why that's not a good idea. What do they need to do instead before they walk into the room?
Well, I think, first of all, use the manners your mama taught you, and make good eye contact and give a firm, dry handshake and all that. But after that, sit down and instigate a conversation between two people with similar interests. And you can do that by starting with your own questions or asking about the role or asking about what it's like to work here. You say, I did my research. I see you've been here 11 years. What still gets you out of bed in the morning? What excites you about coming to work here? And take a little more assertive role in the process.
I can imagine listeners saying, well, be assertive. Won't that jeopardize my chances of getting the job? Aren't I there to listen and to answer the questions and wait to be told what to do?
Fair enough. And the answer is no. That's what everybody else is going to do. And our job in the job interview is to stand out a little bit and to show some confidence and to display some poise and to stick out a little bit and make them think about, wow, this is not my typical interview. Maybe this is a good thing.
So, Mark, do you think that applicants should actually take charge of the interview and exercise some control here?
No, I wouldn't say take charge. I wouldn't say be that assertive, but I would say co-manage. Be an integral part of the conversation rather than waiting for the interrogation.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What does co-management mean when you're sitting there in the applicant's chair?
Well, first, it means that you've done as much homework on the company and the interviewer as they've done on you. And you and I both know that means they've checked you out on social media, starting with LinkedIn, then probably Facebook and Twitter if you're there. They might even go down to Snapchat and Instagram. They've checked you out pretty good, or you wouldn't be sitting in that chair right now. So give them the same courtesy and show them that you've given them that courtesy, and ask questions about the mission and about the progress and where they are against their milestones for the year or as a startup. And that's where you want to be a little assertive and let them know that yes, I'm here to hopefully win the job offer, but I'm also here to make sure it's a really good match for both of us.
Now, I don't want to belabor this point, but I'm sure you've had this experience. I certainly have, where we meet people who tell us they have a job interview coming up and they're excited because they want to learn more about the company and the position. And what they plan to do, Mark, is treat that conversation as a kind of research or a discovery phase. Just tell me again, why is that not a good idea?
Well, I think some of it is a good idea because you want to show an insatiable level of curiosity. But here's what you don't want to do. You don't want to walk in and ask a question or start a conversation about something that's readily available online already or in a social media feed or in the news. You want to come with a unique set of questions and then apply your skills to this unique position at the job at this company, not some generic position where you've applied for 12 different companies. But you want to show them that I'm interested in this job. That's why I'm in this chair, and I'd like to have a two-way conversation.
So let's talk about the benefits of having that two-way conversation. How does that help the applicant and ultimately, to your point, help them earn that offer?
Well, so here's the problem, Mac. You know this already. Employers, interviewers, HR people, they go through this so many times every single day, and there's almost nothing unique about any of those conversations. And they expect people to just kind of sit back, as you alluded to earlier, and let the interview come to them, and hopefully, yes, to learn something that they didn't know before, because that's going to help make a good decision for both parties. But boy, you got to come in ready, and if it's something on the About Us page or the careers page or something in the social media feed from that morning or industry news that's highly relevant to today's interview, boy, you stand out far above the competition if you walk in and you bring that conversation up rather than waiting for them to do it.
So earlier in the show, we were talking with our co-hosts, and Becky brought up one of her favorite strategies, which is to get the interviewer to imagine you as the applicant in the job. What do you think of that approach, Mark?
Well, that's the key, Becky. You're very smart. That's the key to this whole approach to job interviews. Is if you ask the best questions, and if you've come in having done all of your research, and you start to act like you're already part of the team, that's exactly what's going to happen. That interviewer, the HR person, the gatekeeper, the hiring manager, they're going to start to imagine you in that role, not just as that person that showed up on the LinkedIn profile or the resume or through the ATS, but they're going to start to see you sitting in that desk saying, yeah, she could do this. And that's the ultimate goal.
What are some other strategies that you recommend based on your experience, Mark?
Well, I think one of the key things is to try to steer the cliche questions back to something highly relevant. For instance, if you can tell a story rather than say, where do you see yourself 5 years from now, that kind of thing. If you can tell a story that actually helps that recruiter again see you in that position, we're talking about a particular time you solved a crisis or saved a customer, and especially if you attach numbers or percentages or dollar signs to that story, then they really start to see you in that role. They start to get excited about the possibility. And the questions now that come to you go from the mundane, the ordinary, the scripted questions to, wait a minute, tell me more about that. We had that same problem here. How did you solve that problem? And now, again, you're having a two-way conversation.
Yeah. I run another business, a public relations firm, and I work with a business coach who encourages that same technique. And he says when you're sitting down with a prospective client, you want to draw them out about their problems and then use it as an opportunity to tell a story about a problem you've had and a service you offer that has solved that problem, and again, be specific about the results. But do it so that the person sitting across from you will say, hey, I want that. Can you do that for me?
Well, the old cliche about begin with the end in mind, that's exactly what you're describing. And if you prove yourself as a critical thinker and a problem solver, and what employer doesn't want those two soft skills on the, to check them off the list, you're accomplishing all your major goals.
So I love it that you brought up beginning with the end in mind, because I'm a big fan of reverse mapping, Mark. So just playing along with your point here, so we're walking out of that interview and we want to get an offer. What else would you recommend people visualize and think about doing, just working back from that result to get someone to say, hey, either to you directly or after you leave the room, I want to hire him or her?
Well, first of all, understand what the expectations of that specific meeting are. Is this the first interview? So the optimum situation is that you'll be called back for a second interview. Is this the final interview? Is this, decision time is today? Understand the risks, understand the rewards, and then you can reverse map back to the situation. For instance, it amazes me, Mac, how many people leave an interview without any kind of a closing discussion. They don't set expectations. They don't let the person know they'll be following up or how. They don't ask what the best way to follow up is and when they should. And then they leave that meeting and a little bit stressed, a little bit uncomfortable. It's like the fact is candidates would rather be lied to and say, well, we're going to make a decision by this Friday and we'll call you on Monday. Usually that doesn't happen, even when recruiters sound like they really mean it. But they'd rather hear that than just wonder, okay, well, what's next? Well, rather than wonder what's next, reverse map it back and say, okay, when should we talk again? It seems like today's conversation went really well. I'm really excited. When are we going to talk next? Ask the question, and then from there reverse map back to the conversation. And that's a great time, by the way, to bring up a follow-up question or one of the primary questions that you came armed with today that hasn't been asked. That's a great time to map that out and to figure out what's next. But don't reverse map the whole thing, but then not end up in the spot you want to be. And maybe the spot you want to be is this didn't work out today. The company doesn't. Now that I'm here, I'm not too excited about the company, or the interviewer seemed really blasé about my application and my participation. So maybe you don't want the job offer either. Granted, I know everybody has bills to pay, and I know we have deadlines and sense of urgency. But boy, it's better to reverse map that out and go, well, here's what I want to hear in order to have that next conversation, in order to want that next conversation, and that's a big part of it too.
Yeah, it is. And a business, or a job interview rather, is like, it's a business meeting. And none of us, I think, would walk into a business meeting and then leave that room without having a clear sense of what the next steps were and discussing it with all the other parties in the room. And it's always striking to me that so many applicants do leave the room without having that conversation.
Well, you just made an excellent point, Mac. If nothing else, it shows a certain amount of a lack of leadership, a lack of communication, a lack of confidence, right? You, as you said, you'd never leave a business meeting without knowing what your action items are. Don't leave a job interview without knowing either. Okay.
Well, final bit of advice about what people need to do to get that offer, to earn it when they're in that hot seat, whether it's at the start of the process or at the end, Mark.
Well, I'll tell you what, two things. One, if you sense that the interview is not going well, don't be afraid to ask for the do-over. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, when I talk to especially young job seekers, young careers all the time, and it's amazing how effective that technique is. Like, look, it's just, I would like a do-over. I walked in, it didn't seem like we got off to a great start. Let's have a do-over. So don't give up on an interview 10 minutes into it. Ask for the do-over, start over. The interviewer will usually respect that. But more importantly, I like to tell job seekers, if you've done your homework and you've read the job description well and you've checked the company out on social media and LinkedIn, you can walk in with a mini plan. Talk about reverse mapping. Walk in with a mini plan and say, if I were in this role, here's what I think might happen in the first 90 days. How does that sit with you? How does that work? Would it work with the current team? But show the employer that you've actually really done your homework. And I've actually had people take a folder in, a presentation folder, and say, I've taken the liberty to map out a little plan and hand it across the desk. Nobody does that, and it immediately makes you stand out. Even if the plan isn't perfect, at least you're walking in knowing, letting that person know that you've really set aside some time and really thought about this role at this company.
Yeah, and I, based on my experience as an employer, but also talking to other hiring managers, people who do that, who lay out a plan, it may not be perfect, but it exists. They're really going to stand out from the other applicants.
Well, yeah, and it takes you from a candidate role to almost a consultant role, and that puts you in the top 5% of all candidates easy.
Great. Well, this is, I can tell, a subject you enjoy talking about, and I do too, but we do need to bring our conversation to a close, Mark. So tell me, what's next for you?
Well, we're actually launching a new version of U-Turn by the end of this year, and so that's quite exciting for us. And we're also getting heavily involved in a cause we refer to as digital citizenship, where we're teaching both high school students and college students what it's like to be out there online and how to live and work and play safely and with some self-awareness. So it's an exciting time for us right now.
Oh, great. Well, I know people can learn more about you and your company by visiting uturn.com. That's capital YOU, capital TER.com. And they can find you on Twitter, and your Twitter handle is at Mark S. Babbitt, and that's Mark with a K, middle initial S, and 2 T's and 2 B's in Babbitt. We'll be sure to include both the URL and your Twitter handle in the show notes. Mark, thanks for being on the show today.
Of course, Mac. Thank you again.
All right. Take care. And we're back in the studio with the Max List team. I enjoyed that conversation with Mark. What are thoughts of you all around the table?
I like this point about bringing something that shows you've done your research. I remember I interviewed someone once, and they brought me like a marketing plan for the organization. And obviously they didn't have all the details they need to put a real marketing plan together, but it was like a 6-page, like, here's some next action items. And I was really impressed by that.
Yeah.
It made an impression. And pretty easily that person made it to the second round of interviews. The one question I'd have, and I'm going to push this back on you, Mac, is the do-over in an interview. Can you actually do that?
I think you can. Yeah, I think it's okay to start over if you've have been feeling awkward or. Yeah, I was curious about that. I'd like to hear more about that. Maybe we should invite Mark back to do
for a do-over.
For a do-over. But I have seen people once or twice just say, "Hey, I'm not sure I got off to a good start. Can I say that again?"
I've
in an answer. For
yeah,
example.
I mean, I've seen people do it in an answer, saying like, "Let me just reset and then start again on that." But I think what he was saying was like, you could like 10 minutes into an interview be like, "You know what? We got off on the wrong foot here. Let's start the whole thing again. I'm going to walk in the door fresh." If it works, that's fantastic. I wish I knew that in the past.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should invite him back for a do-over to talk about that technique, because it's the first time I've heard it done in that way.
Yeah, I that gave me a pause too. I think you would have to be really like open and honest about it and not like and just try to like relieve those jitters, because I could see that just like making it worse. If you're like, oh wait, can I start over? Like I think that I don't know. I probably wouldn't do that. I would probably just be like, I'm a little nervous, but like I really want to keep talking here and something like that.
I think that's a good approach, and I would also be really curious about what Mark, like his strategies for that, because I think that there are ways that you can sort of address that. If there is something that you start off on the wrong foot and maybe the interview misinterprets something that you said out of nervousness or something like that, and then it kind of just like spirals out of control, and then you're kind of like, wait, but let's kind of go back and then reset, and then like you kind of have a laugh about it, and then that way you're like, oh, I get it, we misinterpreted, and okay, let's start over, kind of a thing. I don't necessarily think it would be a go back to the door and walk back in, but I think that having sitting down together. Again, I've never done that, and I'd be really curious to see kind of the best ways to really make that be really successful. I think that's good.
Hearing a lot of interest in this topic.
Yeah, but I did like his emphasis on making sure that interviewees don't just sit back and wait for the conversation to happen at them. I liked his emphasis on making sure that it is a two-way street and you are interviewing each other, and you need to be as prepared as the interviewer is, and you need to be contributing just as much, and you don't have to kind of just sit with your hands folded and say, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, to all the questions. You can contribute, and you can show your true personality, and that you're prepared, and that you are a great candidate, and that you are you're ready to be there and excited to be there. So I thought that was a really good reminder.
And if you do that, you increase the chances that you'll get an offer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Good. Well, thanks, everybody. And thank you, Mark, for joining us this week. And thank you, our listeners, for downloading today's episode of Find Your Dream Job. If you like what you hear, please sign up for our free weekly newsletter. In each issue, we give you the key points of that week's show. We also include links to all the resources mentioned, and you get a transcript of the full episode. If you subscribe to the newsletter now, we'll send you our new guide, the Top Career Podcasts of 2017. Discover all the podcasts that can help you find a great job and get the career you want. Get your free newsletter and podcast guide today. Go to maxlist.org/topcareerpodcasts2017. And join us next Wednesday when our special guest will be Robert Cugno. He'll explain how to position yourself for your next job. Until next time, thanks for letting us help you find your dream job.